Well, here we are in Lent, a time when many people give up something. Sometimes we give up something simple like chocolate, or it may seem like I gave up a haircut for Lent. Sometimes it's something important like traveling or spending money on something. But Lent is a time of reflection and introspection, a time of sacrifice, of giving up something to prepare us for Holy Week. Now, it may seem like we have been living through a season of Lent for an entire year. We've had to give up our worship service together, our fellowship meal. We've had to give up walks and friends and hugs and handshakes and dinner out and picnics, birthday parties and weddings. We've lost the ability to go to movie theaters. We've lost the chance to go on vacations. And we've lost some of our friends. We might ask, haven't we sacrificed enough? The answer might be in this passage, where Jesus calls us to sacrifice something deeper. Now, I remember reading this passage a number of times when I was younger. Sometime back, I think I was in high school. I was pretty full of myself, being a teenager. I heard Jesus call Peter Satan, and I first thought, what a major put down for Peter. Then I thought, well, I don't really believe in Satan. So I thought, well, Peter just blew it off. And then I read this passage sometime, I think maybe in my 30s, not so full of myself. I was a bit confused about where my life was going. And this thing about whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life will save it, completely baffled me. There's no logic there, and I was all about logic and reason. That was a time when I was trying to logically figure out everything, to use reason to get to the bottom of everything. And this passage just did not make sense. But now, it all makes sense. Jesus was making a critical turn in his ministry on earth. He is letting his followers know, really, what he is all about. Jesus is turning from Galilee to Jerusalem. But also he's changing the tone of his ministry. Jesus is pointing to the cross. And Peter is acutely aware of this change. Suddenly, Jesus says in front of the disciples, in front of the whole crowd, Jesus says he's going to be rejected, he's going to suffer, and he's going to die. He spoke plainly about this. No parables, no metaphors. Spoke clearly about this. Now, if you ever want to clear a room at a party, just mention, well, I've been thinking about dying. All of a sudden, people are headed for the kitchen and looking for dessert. Well, Peter rebukes him. They're on a roll, Peter says. Look at all this, Peter. Look at all this, Jesus. Look at what we have. You've got a big following here. You just fed 5,000 people, and people love you. You have just healed a blind man, and the crowd went wild with joy. When you invite people to follow you, like Matthew, the tax collector, all they have to do is, just follow you. And us, your disciples. We just tag along and people pass us notes to pass on to you to heal their mother or their kid. The Pharisees are on the run. All around Galilee, you are famous. And more important to Peter, he says, and we're famous. Now all of a sudden, Jesus, you're ruining all of this. Jesus is talking about the cross. He's talking about dying. And Peter says, Jesus, don't mess this up. We're on a roll. But Jesus turns to him and in front of everyone says, get behind me, Satan. And I remember thinking, whoa, he's kind of going overboard here. And probably James and John sort of inch away from Peter, distance themselves from Peter and look away. What was Jesus thinking? Why was he so upset? Well, Peter is tempting Jesus to avoid the path to the cross, to avoid suffering and death. Here, Jesus is referring to an earlier confrontation. Remember in the wilderness? In the wilderness, Satan tested Jesus, pointing to all the cities and the countryside and said, all this can be yours if you worship me. Peter is saying the same thing. He's waving his hand across the big crowd and saying, this is all yours. Let's keep going with this. And here too, Jesus is tempted to avoid the path of the cross, to avoid suffering and death. Jesus says, all this is not why I'm here. You have your mind on human concerns. Get it together, Peter. Put your mind on concerns of God. And probably Jesus swept his hands across all this crowd and towards the Sea of Galilee and said, all this is just prelude. You know, a few verses earlier, Jesus asked Peter, who do you say I am? And Peter answered, you are the Christ. So Jesus said to Satan, and he says to Peter, and he says to all his followers, and if we listen, he's saying to us, there is no Christ without the cross.